Every year I get really excited about the Halloween season and I want to make like 100 different things. And one thing I really love doing is coming up with new designs for jack-o'-lanterns, but following the exact same process I did the previous year or following a new tutorial to the letter, I guess is just too boring for me. Maybe it's not fun if I'm not experimenting, or I just like creating problems for myself to solve. Regardless, this intentional chaos doesn't really lend itself well to a coherent video for YouTube that anyone would watch. Not that anybody watches anyway, but I still enjoy sharing these odd creations I come up with. There are quite a few things I've made these past couple years that I think turned out really cool, but the way I reached those results isn't necessarily how I would suggest someone else to do it. So instead of scrapping the hours upon hours of footage and never posting anything, I guess I'll talk a little bit about my process, the things that worked and the things that did not, and hopefully you'll be able to find a way to apply it to your own work and make something cool. I got this styrofoam cooler from work for free. I think it was used to transport medicine or night crawlers or both, I'm not really sure. I've seen plenty of foam jack-o'-lantern videos, so this could work. Only problem is it's rectangular instead of, round like a pumpkin. So I use a $20 hot wire cutter tool to smooth out all those 90-degree angles and get closer to an oval shape. I drew on my design with a marker and started cutting it out with that same $20 hot wire cutting tool, but with a different cutting head. I keep mentioning that it's a $20 tool because you don't have to get super expensive stuff to do this. Unless $20 is super expensive, I don't know. I was inspired by one of Drakenfang's pumpkins to make the swirly eye. Go over and check out his YouTube channel, he's got a lot of awesome stuff over there. I melted the ridges into the pumpkin with the hot wire tool, but I think if I were to do this over again, I would have just cut the ridges out with a knife instead, because I ended up using a knife to taper the ridges anyway. That way I for sure wouldn't be leaving any deep gouges from the hot wire tool that I don't want there and have to cover up later. And the ridges would be shallower, which also look better. I didn't catch footage of it, but I was starting to get really tired of the lid of the cooler always falling off, so I used some Gorilla Glue to completely coat the inside of the lid, because Gorilla Glue foams up a bit and will give the inside of the pumpkin that you can actually see an interesting monstery texture. This might be an expensive way to get the effect, but I had an opened bottle that was partially used, and I've had enough bottles of Gorilla Glue I was sure I had sealed tightly solidify on me, and then I'd have to throw them out. So use it or lose it in this case. I think from there I would have used some sandpaper, maybe 80 or maybe 120 grit to smooth out the edges of the pumpkin, but instead I wasn't satisfied with the roundness of the pumpkin, so I went absolutely crazy with spray foam and tried to accentuate those ridges. This was a bad idea. Don't do this. I still wasn't satisfied, so I wasted another can of foam. This is really tough to watch. I mean, it looks rounder now, but at what cost? I have to shave the spray foam down with a knife, which took a significant chunk of time. Then I wasted even more time using those cut off pieces and hot gluing them into all the recesses to cut down on waste, but use a bunch of hot glue, so yeah, don't do this. Then I switched to Crayola Model Magic, which I believe is a type of foam clay, which would lead to a nice smooth top coat if I used it correctly. I had to mix some wood glue into the Model Magic so that it would stick to anything other than itself. I'm not entirely sure if the amount of glue added contributes to the Model Magic cracking, but I added way too much glue. You don't need to add much at all, just enough so the Model Magic has a bit of tack to it. This should not be used as a gap filler because if it is thicker than maybe 1/4 of an inch, it is going to crack like crazy, as you can see here. Just a thin top coat layer to cover the styrofoam texture is how the Model Magic should be used. As thin as you can get it. This pumpkin was so big that I had to do several passes so I wouldn't be mashing my hands into sections I had already covered when trying to move it around. I'm regularly dipping my hand in water so I can smooth out the Model Magic and not have it stick to my hand or take any extra texture. I don't think I've seen anyone else use Model Magic this way before, so this is kind of my own little experiment thing. So you know, I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go. But it takes a couple days for the Model Magic to dry and fully cure. The thinner the layer, the faster it'll dry / cure, of course, and then you can move on to the next step. Even if you apply a thin coat, there will still be a little bit of cracking, just not as egregiously bad as this. I used paintable acrylic caulking to cover all of the cracks. I also used my fingers regularly dipped in water to smooth over the caulking and remove any sort of texture from my fingerprints. I might have only done one pass on this, but 2 or 3 would have been better for the amount of cracking that occurred on this thickly applied Model Magic. Again, this is my own experiment. Don't make the same mistakes I made, and it'll be a lot easier to get a nice smooth finish. Somewhere in here I added a stem, which is a leftover piece of styrofoam sculpted over top of with air dry clay that was glued into place. I used air dry clay because I planned on picking the pumpkin up by the stem and wanted something more solid than the foam consistency of Model Magic, so it'd be more durable. This is the fully cured pumpkin. Right before I blasted it with orange spray paint and used wood stain to get a grungy looking shading. If you get up close, you can still see all the cracks, but if I'd taken my time and done a couple more layers of the acrylic caulking, or cut away all that excess Model Magic and then put one thin layer over top of that, I don't know, maybe it would have turned out better, but from 5 or 10 feet away, you can't tell the difference if it's cracked or not. So that's one of the projects I completed over a year ago. The process for this next pumpkin is mostly shown in pictures. This is another cooler, but I cut it up to have less of a boxy look, but still ended up with flat sides on it, so I tried using spray foam to get the pumpkin rounded out a bit more, but I still didn't quite get there. I was rushing through all these projects last year, so this is what happens. I built up the stem out of aluminum foil and hot glue, and then coated it with cotton ball mache, which is just cotton balls dipped in wood glue. Then I tried using Model Magic to gap fill, which I have previously said, don't do this, this is the wrong thing to do. You can see the horrible cracking going on here. One could argue that it was an aesthetic choice for the pumpkin to be cracked, but that wasn't my intention, so I'm not gonna lie and say that it was. The pinkish purple spots are cut-offs of styrofoam that I melted in acetone into like a putty and then applied. At least that doesn't crack. Then I switched to the smarter choice of using cellulose insulation paper mache paste to cover some of the cracks. I should have covered the whole thing, but it was like a week before Halloween last year. I was trying to get a video out. I was having a really rough time. I didn't like how this thing looked. I just wanted it done, so I spray painted it sloppily. Thought I would try a lighter orangish yellow on top of the orange base coat so all my pumpkins weren't a uniform color. Didn't bother being precise painting the stem brown. Then I slapped on some dark walnut wood stain to weather it. I let the stain sit for half an hour or so and then wiped away most of it and feathered out the edges of the stain with a rag. Well, actually, it's a sock that was eviscerated by my razor sharp toenails, but whatever, doesn't matter. I don't like this one. I want to destroy it. Sunken cost fallacy is for sure a thing. I have a really hard time bringing myself to throw anything away, so I think I might try to hack this up a bit and get it into some sort of a passable state, for me at least, to be satisfied with it. But for this video, I'm done with it. So yeah, there it is. Delete the footage. The last one I'm going to show in this video is a big one. I've seen multiple videos where people are like, go to your local Tractor Supply or hardware store and they'll probably just give you solid foam blocks that you can make a giant cube out of to make a pumpkin. But I know that if I go to my local Tractor Supply or hardware store and ask for these styrofoam packing blocks, they'll either look at me like I'm absolutely insane or be complete carny grifters and want me to pay an arm and a leg, just some wild amount of money for them. So I got this idea to use the styrofoam I have access to from work, which is mostly packaging from TVs, and I'll stick them all together to make a sort of shell that I can make a pumpkin from. That way I don't have to go through the trouble of trying to hollow out a giant foam block. So with a couple cans of spray foam and a bunch of wooden skewers, I pieced together a rectangular frame. Assembling these sticks of styrofoam was kind of unwieldy, but even so, I should have tried to make a circular shape instead of rectangular. I knew I would destroy my cheap hot wire cutter trying to sculpt this foam, and it wouldn't go through the spray foam anyway, so I spent like 15 bucks and bought an electric bread knife, which is freaking incredible. If you're cutting through large chunks of foam and don't want to drop a bunch of money on one of those hot wire bow things, get an electric bread knife. It makes a mess with the styrofoam dust it generates, but it makes carving details super easy. I was inspired by the Oni of Japanese mythology and lore for the design of this big guy, so I'm transferring the face I sketched up on the iPad onto the styrofoam with marker. And I have these pieces of foam that'll work great for a nose and cheekbones. And a decent use for the cutoffs would be to build up the eyebrows. These all get stuck in place with more foam, and I added some foam onto the bottom lip jaw area. Then out comes the bread knife, and I sculpt more of the face. The face had many layers of styrofoam and spray foam, so I coated my fist with armament hockey and tried to punch out the mouth region I believed I had adequately carved out and caused way more damage than I expected. I bought a hot knife from the hardware store because apparently that's a thing, and tried using that to do some more carving. Then I pieced together the obliterated jaw with skewers and adjusted the nose, then I set them in place with some more spray foam, and I used the rest of the can to try to gap fill. Can you see how these mistakes and experiments are starting to pile up? I thought maybe I'd cut down on all the styrofoam waste by melting it down with acetone. This is a $3 bottle of nail polish remover. Same thing? Well, not exactly. It says 100% acetone, but it is absolutely watered down. I had to pick the spray foam off the styrofoam pieces because it doesn't melt in acetone. Definitely should not be handling this stuff with bare hands. It got messy, so I stopped recording, but I melted a huge wad of styrofoam that was the consistency of clay and let it dry out a bit before applying it to the face of the pumpkin. In the meantime, I started cutting out the giant fangs, trying to keep them somewhat uniform in shape and size, and sanding them down somewhat smooth with a sanding sponge. Here's a dry fit of the full mouth of chompers with some toothpicks to hold them in place. And this is how I applied the melted styrofoam to the face. It did melt through the styrofoam a bit, but not too bad, and it is hard as plastic, so that's cool. I needed to find a way to cover up that styrofoam texture and the gaps between pieces. I knew I needed a lot of it, so I landed on spackle. I don't think that was a good idea. Styrofoam has a bit of give to it, so it probably isn't the best base for spackle or joint compound, but I did it anyway. I wanted to get the mouth smoothed out first so I could glue the teeth in and not have to worry about working around them. I think I used Liquid Nails construction adhesive, which took forever to dry. I think a quicker way would be to use something like Gorilla Glue. I don't want to use hot glue because if this guy is going to be sitting out in the sun all day, that glue will probably melt and his teeth will fall out. I melted the rest of my foam cutoffs and built up the nostrils because they weren't done yet, and I really started feeling the pressure to just get this dang thing done. I also put together this odd shaped stem because I thought since this is an Oni style pumpkin, I could do a sumo style top knot hair thing for the stem. I was watching the Wano arc of One Piece last year and wanted to get that Zorojuro or Sangoro look. I wanted to stick the stem in place but also bulk it up a bit with some spray foam, and it was a disaster. I should have pinned it down with some skewers first, but I was in a hurry. Wasn't thinking. I was stupid. I also used a separate can to try to round out the flatter sides of the pumpkin. So it was time to break out the old bread knife and do some more carving. It was still looking pretty rough, so I changed tact and switched to paper mache paste made out of cellulose insulation to cover those gaps and smooth things out better. I think I should have used this method first over the entirety of the pumpkin and then done a thin coat of spackle or joint compound to get a nice smooth finish. It already looks way better. See how this could never be a tutorial because I'm just making it up as I go? I sanded down some of the spackled sections and it looks pretty smooth, which is good. The inside is absolutely ugly, and I wanted the space that you can see through the eyes and mouth to look uniform but more natural looking. I want it to look like it was grown, not built by me, the clueless idiot. So instead of making a massive mess trying to work with even more spray foam, I found some post hole foam. It's a 2-part bag that when you break the seal between the 2 parts and do a quick mix job, you pour the liquid out and in like 2 minutes it turns into hard foam. One bag was way too much to try to coat the inside at one time. I was picking up the pumpkin and trying to spin it around like a half-wit human rotocast machine, and it hardened up before I could get the coverage I wanted. Good thing I bought 2 bags. So then off camera I did what I should have done in the first place and poured each part into separate cups and then mixed the foam in batches to coat the inside with a more manageable amount. Here's a look at the outside fully spackled and sanded. It's not the prettiest up close. You can see a ding there with the exposed foam. Again, should have coated the whole thing with paper mache paste first, and you can see that the paste looks great coated and sanded down. I thought I might be able to make that easily sandable spackle a bit more durable by applying a watered down coat of wood glue. Probably didn't do anything, but I did it anyways. I was done trying to smooth this thing out, so I started throwing on some spray paint. I taped off the mouth and stem so I wouldn't have to be as precise with the spray paint and have less touch-ups to do. Hey, what kind of bug is this? I've just been calling it a Beetleborg. You can see it's not completely smooth, but good enough. I really like how I weathered and shaded this one, using more non-traditional colors to add to that kind of otherworldly look, I think. Since I used some craft paints on it, I should probably seal it all in with some type of varnish, which is something I still need to do. This one was a lot of work, a lot that was probably unnecessary, but I really love how it turned out. In summation, no one is going to be using Crayola Model Magic besides me. It was my experiment. It was something that was on clearance at my local store, so I thought I'd try it, whatever. I've got some more videos I'm working on where it went right, but just avoid it entirely. I tried to reinvent the wheel, but just go with the wheel that already exists. Building off of a styrofoam base isn't a terrible idea. It's quicker than paper macheing a balloon or beach ball, especially at such a large size, but don't use a ton of spray foam to try to fix it, because you'll be wasting a ton of time and money trying to do that. Build up your armature structure with more solid styrofoam or even cardboard. To get rid of the styrofoam texture, I'd use paper mache paste, or maybe even just regular newspaper paper mache could work. Then if you need a smooth finish, maybe try joint compounder spackle. I don't know if you'll get anything out of this video, but I can delete all the raw footage, clogging up the old hard drive, and move the hell on. So regardless, thank you for watching, and I got some more Halloween stuff that'll be out hopefully shortly.